Setting up for a family photo in a vast family that has found an urgent new purpose. There are 30 members of NATO, almost half of whom used to be under the Soviet yoke, all of whom now see Russia as an immediate threat. One by one, they try to capture the moment of today.
It is an opportunity to show that NATO is back.
If Vladimir Putin was hoping that he would be getting less NATO on his western front as a result of his unprovoked illegal invasion of Ukraine, he's been proved completely wrong.
I hope very much that we will use this opportunity. This is probably the last time opportunity to take the decisions which will be bold enough to stop Russia, to prevent Russia from further actions, and to achieve that this adventure, if I call it like this way, will be stopped in Ukraine.
Away from the suits, this is what more NATO will look like. Troops practicing war in the forests of Estonia. NATO will increase its troop numbers for immediate deployment to 300,000, a 7-fold increase. The Baltic states want many more troops stationed on their soil because they now feel that an attack by Russia is a very real possibility. These are NATO anti-missile batteries in Poland, a country in which history, geography and Russia are creating sleepless nights. But there are divisions here between those who feel Russia poses an existential threat to their existence and those who feel that a long war poses an existential threat to their prosperity.
Eine der Konsequenzen der Zeitenwende, die wir erleben, ist, dass wir sehr viel mehr Geld für Verteidigung ausgeben werden. Deutschland spielt dabei eine zentrale Rolle. Wir haben ein Sondervermögen von 100 Milliarden Euro auf den Weg gebracht und werden jetzt einen erheblichen Beitrag leisten zur Stabilität und Sicherheit, die die NATO gewährleistet, für den Frieden, der uns allen so wichtig ist.
Nothing makes NATO's point better than a Russian missile. This one on Monday, on a crowded shopping mall nowhere near the front line, killed at least 18 civilians. The leader, who now appears at all international summits like a hologram of moral conscience, referred to the missile attack in his opening address to the NATO summit today. Zelensky may not be here in person, but some of his people are.
Unfortunately, I see that not all Western leaders heard this slogan, "Be brave like Ukraine." Because to me, these...
Who is not being brave?
We know these people because, like, for example, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is saying Ukraine should win. He is acting as a brave man. And Olaf Scholz is saying Putin should not win. And it's not the same. I just saw Mr. Scholz minutes ago. And I think that Germany should be more brave, more courageous, taking courageous steps. Because today is time of courage.
Time of courage and time for deals. President Erdogan still looked grumpy last night, but he finally dropped his veto to Sweden and Finland's membership of NATO. What persuaded him? Money, US fighter jets and a pledge by Sweden and Finland to stop giving asylum to Kurdish rebels. Unity at these summits is tempered by national expediency. Just ask Joe Biden. Yes, Russia is the clear and present danger here, but the president also got the summit to focus on China today, the emerging superpower that Washington sees as its most vexing rival. Well, Igor Zhokva is President Volodymyr Zelensky's main man here at the summit. I began by asking him, wasn't it ironic that Ukraine had candidate status for the European Union, but not for NATO?
Well, that's true. I don't think NATO has any candidate status, but I understand what you mean. We still think that NATO security guarantees are the best security guarantees ever, including for my country, but currently we don't have them.
And yet this whole meeting, all this is really about you. It's about Ukraine, it's about, stopping a wider war. You are the most senior representative at this conference of the Ukrainian government. You've been in meetings all day long. What have they told you? What have they given you? What have they promised you?
Well, first of all, very important to notice that the summit itself started with a speech of my president.
Yeah.
And he was making his case and his overview what should be done by NATO vis-à-vis Ukraine, vis-à-vis the situation in this part of the world, vis-à-vis the situation in the continent. We together, he told, have to win this war.
But are you getting more today than you thought you might be getting last night?
Well, the important decision will be taken about the enlargement of the comprehensive assistance package for Ukraine, which is a non-lethal support for Ukraine, but that's what we have.
But this is also about strengthening the wall, the NATO wall, of the Baltic republics, countries like Poland, Romania, on the eastern flank of NATO. You're on the other side of that wall.
You cannot build a wall because, my president was mentioning today, Russia is not only attacking physically Ukraine now, Russia is threatening now to several members of NATO, like to Lithuania, for instance. This is what's happening. What is the NATO response for that? It should be a strong response. So it's impossible to build a wall. We are together in this region of the world. We are together in Europe.
But in your meetings today, have you been promised more weapons, the kind of weapons that you need, heavy weapons, in order to fight this war?
When I was talking to several foreign leaders today, I raised this issue with them. So we're on a good track. It's moving slowly, unfortunately, but it's moving. It was not the case several months ago. Do we have enough? No. Do we have it quick? Unfortunately, no. But we immediately need this weapon now, within the next 2 or 3 weeks. The situation in the Donbass is very difficult, and we have to win. But we can only win with the support of heavy weaponry.
But if you don't get those weapons in the next 2 or 3 weeks, that's a tiny, frame of time. Do you think you're going to lose the Donbass forever?
Well, it's hard to tell you now. It's hard to predict you now what happened. It's difficult fight in the Donbass. Russians are outnumbering us in manpower, in weapon, in ammunition, in equipment, in everything. But we are standing. We are standing in the Donbass for already 8 years. But to make our task easy, to win in the Donbass, you all, NATO countries, have to help us.
Are you worried that the longer this war takes, especially as we approach into winter, the greater the economic pressure on countries like Germany and Italy and France and Britain, and they will say to you, we're still going to help you, we are on your side, but please can you find a settlement to end this war quickly because it's hurting us at home?
We will not end the war on someone else's, conditions. And that's what clearly was told to us by Chancellor Scholz, by President Macron, by Prime Minister Draghi, by Prime Minister Johnson when they visited Kiev. It will be up to Ukraine to decide when and how to end the war. Definitely the war should
no
end
hint of pressure from those Western leaders?
No, but the pressure from us was, please provide us more and more weapons.
How long will this last, do you think?
No one knows. So the time definitely plays in the Russian hands. We are losing, unfortunately, people every day. And that's what is not, the desire of Ukrainian people, of each and every Ukrainian.
Is there a danger here, finally, that there's a division between those countries, obviously you, but also the Baltic republics, Poland, who see this as an existential threat to their existence, and those countries who see Russia as an existential threat to their prosperity?
Well, look, it's a moral choice. You have endangered prosperity as a one, stake. And the other stake is the deaths of Ukrainian people. And you have at one stake, you're thinking the war is only in Ukraine, but you have to think that the war is not only in Ukraine. It's physically now in Ukraine, but it's against everyone in Europe. Don't think that somewhere in Madrid or somewhere in London you will be simply sitting before the screen or before the laptop and watching this as a movie. No, this horror movie may come to you if you not stop this horror movie here in Ukraine.
Igor Jokra, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And later I'll be talking to the Finnish foreign minister about what persuaded Turkey to remove its opposition to Finland and Sweden joining NATO. Now for the rest of the day's news, let's go to Krish in London. Krish.
Thanks, Matt. Now, the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, has described Russia as very, very dangerous on the world stage, as he called for the UK to raise defence spending by the middle of the decade. But there's a political row brewing. Our policy correspondent, Paul McNamara, has more.
Thanks, Krish. So let's start with the big picture. Defence spending as a share of the country's GDP, its output, has fallen massively since NATO was founded. There was a small bump at the peak of the Afghanistan war, but now, according to NATO estimates, the UK is spending about 2.1% this year. The government says, actually, that's bumped up to about 2.3% when you include the £1.3 billion in extra spending for arms to Ukraine. In cold, hard cash, for the last year that we have full defence spending figures, that was around £42.5 billion. Now, the government is keen to point out that we are actually spending much more than NATO's 2% target. Some economists think that may well fall in the coming years.
The economy in cash terms is expected to grow quite rapidly over the next few years, partly because of much higher inflation. And when we stick in the government's existing spending plans, it's still set to deliver on the 2% target, but by a smaller margin. And by the end of this Parliament, we're much closer to breaching that target than the government might have expected.
There's another accusation being thrown at the government. The 2019 Tory manifesto said defence spending will increase, quote, by at least 0.5% above inflation every year of the new Parliament. They even put it in bold. Well, inflation is currently running at 9%. So many are arguing that pledge is being broken. The Defence Secretary said today the manifesto was a pre-COVID pledge and things changed. But some economists say that above-inflation promise may well actually hold over the Parliament because when you analyse government department spending, they don't use RPI and CPI like we do, as that includes things like food and fuel. They use a measure called GDP deflator, which is currently running at about 4%. By that measure, when you take a look at how defence spending in real terms has and is expected to change, what you see is a small increase 2 years ago, a massive increase last year, 9.6% above inflation, and then small falls predicted in the last 2 years. Over the whole of Parliament, that equates to a 1.5 increase every year above the form of inflation government uses. Now, there are, of course, still wranglings over defence targets. Last year, the government conducted a major integrated review of security, defence and foreign policy, where they decided the target size of the army would drop from 82,000 soldiers to 72,500 by 2025. But just yesterday, a little over a year after that major review, the Defence Secretary said those numbers might need a rethink. In defence, especially in times of war, budgets and boots on the ground are always up for discussion.